It is your Friday daily delivery. I'm Michael Rand, happy to be back for another episode. Probably not the final one of the week, considering something over the weekend. Probably either late tonight or early Saturday off of those Friday playoff games. Again, those are at home. Wolves coming back down 0-2 in that series with Denver. Wild 1-1. Both teams losing on Wednesday night, and that's what I want to focus on here in just a minute. We'll also get to Nate Tice, podcaster and writer for The Athletic, covers a lot of draft stuff. Also happens to be the son of former Vikings head coach Mike Tice. He will join me here in a little while to talk draft, to talk Mike Tice stories, to talk all sorts of good stuff. Really enjoyed that conversation with Nate Tice. I hope you do as well in just a little bit here. Have some Twins thoughts towards the end of the show and a little bit of extra Vikings draft context as well. First, though, what did I miss? Like I said, I want to spend a little time on the Wolves and Wild at the beginning of the show. I know I did a fair amount of that already on Thursday's show with Chip Scoggins. Hope you enjoyed that. That came to you very late or early, depending on when you listened after they both lost on Wednesday. I want to give you some perspective from what I see it, how both of these teams can rebound from Wednesday, what both of them need to do in order to win their respective game threes, and a lot of different things at stake here. The Wolves lose this game, the series is ostensibly over. I mean, I know they could still win game 4, salvage some sort of pride, but any sort of getting into the series certainly requires winning game 3 on Friday. The Wild feels like this is a pivotal game, but not a do-or-die game in the same vein. They could still be okay as long as they won Sunday, but this is really where both teams want to take care of business, especially after some things went sideways for them on Wednesday. For the Wolves, let's start there. Things they need to lean into and things they must do to win this game 3, and I preface this by saying I don't think maybe we've talked enough in this series about how much they miss Jaden McDaniels and Naz Reid to an extent as well, but specifically Jaden McDaniels, because this is a team, that when they can play big, they really thrive. One of their best 3-man lineups this season was Rudy Gobert, Kyle Anderson, and Jaden McDaniels at the 5, 4, and the 3. That lineup played 762 minutes together and had a net rating of 9.7, plus 9.7. That's points per 100 possessions that they were up with those 3 guys in the lineup. They obviously don't have that luxury. Jaden McDaniels punched a wall in game 82 of the regular season, has been out ever since then with broken bones in that punching hand. So we know that he's not going to play, so they have to kind of get beyond that. But I do think it's important to state the obvious that they certainly miss him and Naz Reid, because this is a team that, maybe this sounds like an oxymoron, but they have good depth when people are healthy. And what I mean by that is they have a strong kind of 1 through 9, 1 through 10 when everybody's healthy, and there's a pretty significant drop-off, at least in the playoffs, when you start dealing with some injuries. I think Jalen Noel's been okay in spurts, but they just don't have much beyond 7 players right now that they really trust in these big moments. They got some good minutes during the regular season from Nate Knight, some Austin Rivers moments, some Luka Garza moments, things like that. Those are not guys that you were going to put out there in the playoffs for any kind of sustained amount of time. That's just not. So their bench is built in a certain way. They're not built to withstand too many injuries. They are built to have a strong 1 through 10, not necessarily a strong 1 through 12 or strong 1 through 15. So keeping that in mind, I feel like this is important as context, but with that in mind, they need to lean into the lineups that have worked for them. And one of the lineups that has worked for them throughout the year includes Anthony Edwards, Rudy Gobert, and Kyle Anderson. We need to see more of those 3 together. They haven't been great in this series, but during the regular season, 815 minutes, a 6.6 positive net rating for those 3 when they are together. It's really the Kyle Anderson lineups that you will see is a theme of their best lineups. Now, I do feel, though, that saying that is an acknowledgement that Karl-Anthony Towns is not playing well, and that a lot of their best lineups do not include Karl-Anthony Towns, and that maybe is a question for the offseason, is a bigger question for another day. But I think that there's two things at play here. One, they need to lean into their best lineups. Two, they absolutely need to get more out of Karl-Anthony Towns, who's only scored 21 combined points in these two games, is turning it over too much, is not making the easy play like Chris Finch says. The ball tends to stop with him. He's not going to the basket right away when he gets it. He seems unsure of himself, and whether that's because of who's playing with him, whether that's his own tentativeness, whether that's nervousness, I don't know what it is, whether it's just all the games he missed this year, whatever it is, they need a combination of A, more from Towns, and B, don't be stubborn. Play the lineups that work for you and deal with the consequences of whose feelings might be hurt later. Now, the Wild, their mission is a little bit more simple. Stop overthinking this. Philip Gustafson is your goalie. Do not deviate from that script. That was the big story from Game 2. Marc-Andre Fleury, a playoff veteran, 3 Stanley Cups. I get it. I get that he's got a pedigree, but my goodness, Philip Gustafson's 51 saves in his debut. Last year they stuck with Fleury too long. This year Gustafson wins Game 1 and they go to Fleury in Game 2. I don't get it. I'll never understand it, but if we can move past that, if they can move past that, win Game 3, then a lot of that chatter will be forgotten. Maybe there'll be a rhyme or reason to it once they get to Game 4, Game 5, Game 6. Maybe we'll understand that it was maybe for the best. I don't think we're ever going to get to that point, but maybe they can paper over that mistake if they can get back on track in Game 3. Part of that, to me, though, remains staying out of the penalty box. It remains kind of winning this kind of battle of physicality without the Stars diving and taking so many penalties, things like that. And part of it might mean a return to health for them too. Joel Eriksson drawing in Game 3, if he's able to do that, would be a huge boost. Kind of reunites that second line, gives them a little bit more momentum there, gives them that second gives them that shutdown center, gives them a lot that they've been missing when he's out. He totally changes their lineup if he is able to play Friday, and there's no guarantee he's going to do that, but if he's able to play Friday, or at least at some point in this series, that could turn things if and when he returns. So both these teams need to lean into their strengths, get back to doing what they do, and the Wild in particular need to stop overthinking this. Don't try too hard. It's simple. Philip Gustafson has been your best goalie all season long. He was one of the best goalies in the NHL all season long. He's got to be in net for Game 3. He's got to be in net for Game 4. Stop messing around and stop overthinking it.
Take a playcation to Mystic Lake. With 24/7 gaming, the good times never have to end. And you can satisfy your cravings at our restaurants and bars. Or relax in one of our luxurious hotel rooms. Those that play together, stay together. And don't forget to join Club M so you can spark new memories and bask in the rewards along the way. Follow the lights to Mystic Lake, where every day is play day.
I'm excited to be joined right now by Nate Tice, staff writer with The Athletic, does a lot of NFL draft stuff, does a lot of podcasting, life journeyman according to his Twitter bio, and the son of former Vikings head coach Mike Tice. So I'm hoping he'll behoove me to ask you some stories about your dad as long as I've got you here. But Nate, how you doing? Welcome.
I'm doing very well. Yeah, kind of a life nomad, life journeyman that spent a little time in Minneapolis. So I get that kind of one of us, credibility that the people in the Twin Cities love. So I get to check a lot of boxes. It really helps living in Vegas now because not a ton of people are from here. Yeah. A lot of people are running away from something. So I moved here and I talk to people and someone's like, oh, I've been here for 3 years. Where are you from? New York. Oh, parents are from New York. Oh, where are you from? Seattle. Oh, I was born in Seattle. For me, it's great, but because no one really is from here. So no, I'm happy to be here. So thank you for having me on. And
you do have the Wisconsin football helmet, of course, in the background.
Yes, I know. After I committed to Wisconsin, I was transferring there. I went to Bunnies, of course. Yeah. In St. Louis Park.
You went in there. Your dad was probably there.
Yeah. Actually, it wasn't my mom, though. Okay. The parking spot was no longer there. He actually owns that. I think he has it hung up in his basement here. Okay. But I get there, and one of the longtime bartenders there, his name is Crazy Johnson, and he just looks at me and goes, "Frickin' Badger." And that's all he said to me. And I swear he's still mad about it to this day, like 14 years later. But I went to Wisconsin and went to the other side, the dark side.
Sorry for living my life. Well, right? It's well, I want to talk to you about a lot of different stuff, but you're like in the throes of NFL draft, write-ups, videos, coverage, and you're into this way deeper than I am. I'm on the I'm kind of on the periphery of it because I do a whole bunch of different sports. But as you think about this year's draft, think about the kind of the quarterbacks at the top of the board. You think about just what's been evaluated so far. Is there any kind of consensus or kind of idea of how you would kind of say this is the overriding sentiment about 2023?
This draft, how I've kind of gone about describing it, because I can't think of another synonym phrase for this, is it's the eye of the beholder draft. There's lack of consensus at any position other than running back. Bijan Robinson is everybody's running back one. If you look at every other position, there's little consensus. There's a lot of, I like this about it. There's a lot of blemishes. I would say it's not a seriously top heavy draft, even if there might be 4 quarterbacks to go in the top 10. There is maybe about 8 to 10 true first round graded guys, which is always something that you have to remember. A guy might go in the first round, but teams might not have a first round grade. I know that sounds like an oxymoron, but just bear with me here. That's how it kind of goes.
No, makes sense.
There's a limited resources, supply and demand, all that. And so every position that you look at, quarterback, receiver, offensive line, defensive line, even guys that were the consensus at the beginning of this process, like a Jalen Carter, who a lot of from Georgia, defensive tackle, a lot of guys had him that's like, oh yeah, easy number one. And now there's been some off-field stuff that's cropped up, and now there's some work ethic concerns and play style concerns that all of a sudden no one had an issues with 4 months ago, and now they do. So that's just the draft cycle. It's the silly season. And so you see people making the arguments about blemishes or stuff they like with all these players, and you can believe them. It's really, you can make an argument for a lot of these guys at different positions, and I understand them. So that's a good synopsis of this, that there's little consensus. The consensus is that there's little consensus about this draft. Really, that's how to go about it.
Why do mock drafts change so much? Why is part of it just so you keep reading the next version, or do people really change their evaluations so much between early March and end of April?
I think there's more information that gets brought out there. Certain people that are in the know, I would drop the name Daniel Jeremiah from NFL Network, and even Dane Brugler from The Athletic, who both do a fantastic job. Both of them have their sources. So they might kind of, they might drop a name in there and then they just go, I don't know, I could see it, but they really might know a little something. I don't want to speak for them, but I'm just seeing the process of that. And also people get exposed to more positions. Free agency happens. That's another thing too. So holes get filled, and so needs change, and other things get dropped in. It's just information changes, and there is a little bit of the momentum of kind of what the discussions are with people. I would say a good example is like Florida's Anthony Richardson, the quarterback who I'm high on. But at the beginning of this process, he was going in the 20s. Yeah. And then more people watch film, and then now he's in the teens, and then now he's in the top 10. It's just a narrative momentum. I think also a lot of coaches are getting exposed to these guys, so their input's happening and they're starting to talk around the league. So that's where you see guys rise and fall, and more players just get exposure. It's a lot of guys to watch. I've watched the sexy positions, the offensive skill guys. I've watched the offensive line. I'm just now going through corners right now. Okay. And I've watched the top guys, but now I'm getting into the day 2-ish guys that are in the consensus there. So that is kind of what the process is. Just a lot of players to watch, and more people get more information.
You're talking about board risers. You mentioned Daniel Jeremiah. I don't know if it was his most recent mock, but it was just a couple weeks ago. He was kind of at the forefront of the Hendon Hooker to the Vikings thing that's become even more contagious lately. I believe Todd McShay also had him in a recent mock to the Vikings. What do you think about that? You don't have him, at least in the latest version that I've seen from you. You have them taking a corner, which is certainly very very productive, a very good idea for a team that doesn't have a lot of corners. Quarterback would be a lot more exciting, a lot invigorate the fan base kind of thing. What do you make about the Vikings at 23? Why is there so much of this kind of the Hendon Hooker thing? Is it just people matching a need, or do you think that they really like him? How do you see that piece shaking out with the Vikings?
I think there is a little smoke. That doesn't come out of nowhere, because it was at the time it was out of nowhere, but then it's like, okay, all right, why'd you do that? And but also I think with Hooker, I'm a little lower on him than a lot of other people are. I have more of a middle round grade on him, meaning like 3rd, 4th round grade. Okay. I do have, just speaking of Hooker, just speaking of the concerns, I understand maybe that thought process of what the Vikings are trying to do right now, their decision makers, is, they're trying to bridge two things right now, quasi compete, but quasi rebuild and
competitive rebuild. They're calling
competitive rebuild. Have the Vikings ever rebuilt? I feel like
not by design.
No, not by design, right? all the bottom out years were because of things out of their hands. It wasn't by design. It feels like they've always been in this world of the middle ground or above. So I think that's where it is, where it's like that kind of makes a little bit of sense. There's the argument about the QB contract and how that can help give you more resources to spend, in free agency, all that. My counter argument to that is the player has to be good though. So just having a rookie quarterback contract is one thing, but the guy actually has to be playable, because there's nothing more detrimental to a team's success, just ask the Jets, than having a young quarterback that you're giving reps to. That is the worst opportunity cost that you can have in football. It is just that one position quarterback, because they're on the field every play. You can't just go, rotate him in and let him, let him get some experience. He's out there. So good or bad. So I think that's what it is. They're trying to bridge that gap. I think there's a little smoke there, even if I don't agree with it. He's older, coming off a knee, the offense, of course. I just think that he has more of a learning curve. And if you're saying that he's going to sit out the year behind Kirk Cousins, then he's a 26-year-old he's 2 years older than Jordan Love. He's an older guy. And if that rookie contract ends, he'd be 30 years old. Like that's why it's just, I can understand one part of it, but a lot of it is just hard for me to swallow or condone. I think is a good term I could use.
You think defense, then corner, makes the most sense, or is that just positional value? Or how did you arrive at that in your most recent mock?
Yeah, there's a need there, a dire need. Even last year, playing 30-something-year-old Patrick Peterson, and he did all he could, but that's not a lot of fun when you have limitations of what you can run on defense. I think with Brian Flores, the defense coordinator, coming there, he loves a lot of pressures, a lot of man coverage. He's a Patriot guy through and through, runs the same stuff that Bill Belichick does, but Belichick has found corners at every spot, undrafted guys, middle round guys. He's also taken a guy like Stephon Gilmore, who was in the first round. So it's not just saying like, oh, they'll patch it together. So I think just who they have. I like Byron Murphy, but he has injuries. That's a flyer type of contract. Back issues are a little scary for any position, especially one that uses athleticism, like the corner position. So I think it's a huge need that they have. That is where a lot of corners were probably slotted to go. I would say there's 6 guys that are kind of in the consensus right now to go in the first round, and right middle teens is kind of when I think a run on corners is going to happen. So it kind of made a lot of sense, the pairing of the player, the position, the need, and also just kind of how I thought the draft would break down. Yeah,
and that makes sense. I mean, sometimes a run works in your favor. Like there was a run on receivers around the time they took Justin Jefferson in 2020. There was also a run on receivers in 2016 when they took Laquan Treadwell. So it's not always wise to get in on that run. You have to have a certain amount of conviction about the player, I suppose. And
yes,
for a team that went 13-4, they've got an awful lot of needs.
Right. And that's what happens. That's kind of the bad thing about overplaying or outplaying what your point differential was last year. And being more of a 500 team that won double-digit games. I know that's not much of a difference. 1 or 2 wins is double digits to 500, but still, and getting that kind of playoff seed. But that, speaks to what Kevin O'Connell did and what they slapped together last year. And they, when you have good players like Justin Jefferson, it sure helps to kind of make some plays for you when it matters. But that's kind of like, that was the detriment of what happened last year, is that as opposed to maybe competitively losing and getting like the 10th pick or, the 12th pick, the 11th pick, you're picking a little later. And one positive I will say is that this class only having 10-ish true first round guys, there's a lot of kind of picks between 10 and 50, going to be not much tier difference between the players. And I think that is one good thing about maybe being competitive last year and then going into this year with this draft class. But yeah, they're trying to straddle two things right now. And I feel bad for them because it's hard. It's hard because you want to win, but you also want to be like, well, my contract's 5 years. I want to win in 3 years as well, as opposed to just year 1 and year 2.
Right. Yeah, that's true. And they don't have a second round pick. So they're in an interesting position. I could imagine them, just based on what Kwesi Adofo-Mensah did in his first draft, you could imagine them trading down. You could imagine them trying to get more picks, especially as if you say there's not a lot of maybe not a lot of difference to a certain degree between 11 and 50 if you
Right.
but everybody else knows that too. So how do you how do you manage that?
Yeah, you try to dangle some players that other teams like.
Yes.
Man, wow, we really like this corner too. I know you like the corners too. Oh, wow, we really like this guy. You sure? No, but I think that is trading back, but it takes two to tango.
Yes.
I think there's gonna be a lot of teams looking to trade back, especially where the Vikings are picking. And so that's the thing, is having more picks on day two would be ideal, an ideal outcome for this, or even pushing to next year. But yeah, that's what's tough, is that you always have to find two to tango and also make the deal so that you quote unquote win the trade. Otherwise, there's going to be some backlash about that as well.
Dissecting the film, I mean, we all watch the games. I watch a little bit of film, but you're doing it constantly. Like, I imagine there's got to be just kind of, it's got to be a complicated process. I know you're looking for certain things, but like differentiating between certain college players in particular, like how are you able to kind of like tier guys or categorize guys when there's such a fine line, I'm imagining, between a lot of these guys?
A mental Rolodex.
Okay.
I've been blessed to be around the game for a long time.
Yes.
And just, I can recall guys from my teenage years, Mewelde Moore, guys like that.
Wow.
Burleson.
That is a name. That's a good name.
Yeah. Like even like a guy like Jalen Carter from Georgia, that I compared him, like I haven't dropped this take anywhere, but I've compared him to Kevin Williams. I think that's his upside, at least. I mean, having an all-decade player, potentially a future Hall of Famer, is a great upside to have. But I've seen, that helps me, just having in my teens being exposed to a lot. I also was able to, I was a scout with the Falcons, so that helped me kind of how to be realistic about grading guys. What I've noticed as being part of the kind of the media now and being on draft Twitter a little bit more, being on Twitter overall a lot more, is I see a lot of people fall in love for the outliers and the exceptions.
Sure.
When you have to kind of look at historical comparisons and what has worked. I also think that there is a positive for being useful, that how many snaps can you play? I think being a specialist player, not a kicker or punter, but like a luxury player that only plays 8 snaps, 12 snaps, not a lot of value to that, even if they are good snaps. And I think I always try to keep that in my mind, because there'll be guys I'll fall in love with, and I'll be like, realistically, what is this guy? Oh, he's a slot only receiver. Oh, okay. Well, that makes sense for some teams, but not all teams. But then you have to ding them. So I look for scheme-proof players that, coaches can't screw up, that can go into any type of situation and produce. And then that's something I prioritize. And sometimes I might miss on a high upside player, or a player that, is a luxury player that outplays that and plays more snaps. But kind of you have to be realistic about what their outcomes are. And again, it helps that I've been exposed to seeing a lot of different kind of outcomes for these different types of players. So having something to rely on helps.
I want to get back to that in a minute, but first I want to ask you something. I've seen a couple different places, and this seems so fundamental, but I've seen this kind of shift to like just the flat out number of reps a quarterback has had in high school and college, being not a absolute predictor, but being maybe a tiebreaker, having such an outsized influence. It's like someone who's had to make the reads a certain number of times. It's almost like Malcolm Gladwell-esque. It's like, these are the guys that you're going to want on your team, as opposed to look at the struggles before he got hurt. Trey Lance has had, like, some of these guys who just haven't played as much. That you can have all the raw ability in the world. If you haven't had the reps, it's going to hurt you at a certain point, or it can.
Yeah. And and also it's not theory or not a projection,
Yes.
It's some guys you see, you're projecting, you're like, oh, Lucas Van Ness from Iowa is a good comparison for this, or a good example, is you see, like his middle outcome, I guess, high end outcome, middle income, low end outcome. Middle outcome is probably like, could be a high end role player, but he has a high end outcome that's like, wow, this guy has all the tools to be a legit top 10 pass rusher. And so that's where you're trying to like usable reps, even if they have a low amount of plays. Like Anthony Richardson, I'll bring up from Florida, is he only started, I think, 13 games in his college career, maybe 14. Yeah. And watching him is, okay, there's some games he only throws the ball 14 times. There's some games he throws the ball 20 times. And you watch it and you have to figure out which reps are actually real in the NFL. College football is its own beast, good and bad. Yeah. But there's some plays at certain positions that's like, no one in the NFL runs that, or no one and you run that play twice a year. So I'm not going to use that type of that rep as something that translates. It could be a bootleg for an offensive lineman. This is a play everybody runs, but I'm going to throw that play out because the offensive lineman's not doing anything. So you have to kind of find those usable reps that's like, okay, well, this guy was asked. I project this guy, Lucas Van Ness, I'll say is one. Or here's a better one. Will Anderson from Alabama, who potential top 10 pick. He's aligned as a 4-eye a lot of times in Alabama's defense. That's the inside shade of the tackle. And he's asked to loop around the offensive tackle over and over and over again. That is not really conducive to his skill set, but that's what the scheme Alabama runs.
Yeah.
So, but then there's a couple games like against Tennessee where he's asked to line wide and then right at the snap of the ball, go and just ears pinned back and just pass rush. And that is the ones where it's like, I'm going to translate that and use those reps as opposed to the ones that's like, he might do that a couple times, but that's not going to be how he's used in the NFL. So you have to find kind of that what translates the best for the next level.
Did you know you wanted to stay in the game? I mean, growing up playing it, obviously being the son of an NFL head coach, NFL longtime position coach before that, did you know you wanted to be in this as you got older?
I thought I was going to be a baseball player.
Okay.
And baseball was my first love. And then when I hit a growth spurt in 9th and 10th grade, and I was like, okay, this quarterback thing is pretty fun. People seem to like the quarterback. And I kind of started like the game a lot more in high school. I knew as soon as I hit into college, really junior, senior in high school too, was I didn't want to be part of the game in some way, shape or form. I will say that the negative of the rise of my dad's career he went from player and a year later, he was a tight end coach for Denny Green for the Vikings. I thought that was normal. And I realized that's not normal. You have to work. You have to be a GA. You have to do all the grunt jobs. You don't just become a position coach overnight. And that's something I had to learn. And even when I was a GA at Pitt under Paul Christ, even my dad couldn't relate to that. My dad never coached college. My dad, never was that GA, that quality control coach. He was instantly a position coach. So I couldn't sometimes rely on him, even though I thought I could. My dad, my biggest mentor, is giving me so much information. That's amazing. But he had no idea what the GA does. Like he seriously didn't. And not like knock my dad, but he was just like, I don't know, keep at it, keep working hard. That's all I got. And so I knew I wanted to be around the game. I've never figured out what role exactly I wanted, whether I wanted to be a scout or a coach. I was lucky enough to be able to do both. But I just wanted to be around it. I love sports in general. I just knew I wanted to be around sports, and football ended up being the one. And now sports media has ended up being the career that really made a lot of sense because I get to talk about it and kind of share kind of my enjoyment of the game. And I love competition. I love figuring out things, and I love figuring out how things work just generally in life. And so this is a way for me to do that. That's why I always knew. I love competition too. Yeah. I hide it really well. But my wife knows I'm a psychotic competitor and I just hide it really well. So that's another part of why I wanted to be around the game.
That's an outlet. It's an outlet for sure.
Yes.
A couple more things, Nate, really enjoying this conversation. Nate Tice from The Athletic. I mean, like we talked a little bit just now about, growing up around the game, around your dad. Do you have any favorite stories, favorite memories? He had a pretty amazing rise. Like all of a sudden, Denny gets fired, and he's the head coach at the end of the 2001 season. Holds that job for 4 more years. A lot happened in those 4 years. We're not going to get into all that, but man, it was a wild ride, Nate. It was a wild ride.
Loved being in high school for that. It was so much fun. So much fun being in high school because high school kids are really nice. They really know how to bite their tongue and not bring up stuff at the worst time.
Right.
No, but actually gave me a thick skin as I now like I said, I'm on Twitter a bunch, and when people take pot shots, I'm like, is that all you got? I would say some of the fun memories I had is the moon game at Lambeau was a lot of fun.
Oh, sure.
There's other moments. The one being around Randy Moss, all my life, as a high schooler and middle schooler, and getting to compare players to that and watching how he competed every day or really not competed every day, but flashed the most athletic gifts I've ever seen in my entire life. And that's why I get really defensive when people try to compare people to him. I'm like, you didn't see Randy. You didn't understand that. But I saw, those little stories kind of add up. I have to kind of think of some, seeing, it's small things, like seeing Sean, we would do a throwing competition during special teams practice.
Okay.
Sean Hills beating Dante Culpepper, Gus Farrat, and everybody in a bucket throwing contest. And then you got Randy Moss. We're doing cross practice against the Chiefs. and Randy Moss is catching a fade ball and landing on a guy's shoulders because he jumped so high. Those little, I know, just, and everyone, they're like Paul Bunyan tales, but I'm like, no, it actually happened. I was 14 and I remember it. The Brock Lesnar experience.
Oh my God, I almost forgot about that.
I know. I watched him, he would practice before, practices were easy for him because his cardio was so good.
Sure.
He just had he was strong, but he had he had leg strength, but not football leg strength.
Yeah.
It was a different type of strength. And every day, though, he would come out a half hour before practice, even maybe longer, and just work on drills with the assistant D-line coach at the time. And there's Sable, standing there watching Brock Lesnar work out. And I'm just, I'm 14, 15. I'm like, that's Sable. I was more excited about Sable than freaking Brock Lesnar. Like those little stories add up. Brock Lesnar starting a fight, a brawl against the Chiefs, and Dick Vermeil yelling at my dad right in front of me and going, I'll never practice with you again. My dad canceled practice one time. This is, I think he's probably told this story, but it is one of my favorites. It's a Randy Moss story. Is that my dad ran tough training camps, a lot of padded practices. And then he asked the grounds crew to have the sprinklers turn on. Okay. And because he said during warm-ups, turn them on, that sprayed everybody. I'll act like I'm mad and I'll cancel practice. We're going to have a pool party. So down in Mankato, and the sprinklers come on, it gets moss soaked, he's just covered and he's pissed. Yeah. And my dad's like, coming up, oh, who did this? You know what? It's been tough. Let's go to the pool. Practice is canceled. And everyone goes nuts. And they go in there. So they have a diving contest. Everybody had to nominate someone from each position. Okay. And I'm seeing guys like, these guys are the greatest athletes, so they're doing stuff that's incredible. But there's Randy on the low board just doing like perfect double twists. He doesn't even make a splash. And so my dad asked him, he's like kind of jokingly, but he's like, is there anything you can't do? Like that's unbelievable. And Randy legit thought about it. And he was dead serious when he said this. And he goes, I can't play the piano. And he was dead serious. He was actually had to think about what he can't do. Yeah, what he can't do. It's amazing. I know over time I could probably think of more stories, but like as a kid, it's a great experience when you get to grow up around some great coaches and players. Dante throwing the ball 75 yards, and I thought that was normal, stuff like that. But it was a great upbringing, great childhood, even if it was a little stressful.
Well, you joked. Let me end with this. You joked that you're turning into him more every day. He pops up on Twitter every now and then. He's not super active, but he's funny. He's funny with what he decides to tweet from time to time. I assume he's doing well.
He's doing great. He moved down here. I just had my firstborn, my son, born in November.
Oh, congrats!
Thank you. And my sister had her firstborn last July, so they were living near Seattle in a place called Belfair. That was basically the third child. Was that house that every summer that they spent back there. And he retired and had to live there year round in the kind of the middle of nowhere. And anyone that knows my dad doesn't really do the middle of nowhere. He likes to be part of the action. Sure. And I think after a year or two of that, they kind of, and once my wife got pregnant, my sister had her first, that they're like, hey, we're going to sell the house. And so he moved down here to Vegas and bought a place also in St. Louis where my sister lives. Okay. And it's been amazing. This is the first time we've lived in the same city other than when we were working together in Oakland. Sure. So it's been really, really cool to see kind of grandpa go at it and just be a total sweetheart, in retirement. Yeah. It's unbelievable how he's changed in retirement and in his old age, but my parents are doing fantastic. They're loving and living life like to the fullest.
That's awesome. I appreciate all of this, Nate, in the middle of your busiest time, taking some time out for this show. Great to have a chance to catch up with you, go back to the draft prep work. I'm sure there's a lot more to nail down in the next handful of days, and hopefully we'll catch up again down the road.
Thank you so much for having me. This is a lot of fun.
Postscript, my conversation with Nate Tice. I'm going to write about this on Friday on the Randball blog as well, but the Vikings mock draft, a consensus mock draft of the Vikings, is very hard to come by right now. Just looking at consensus big boards, NFL mock draft, database.com. Hendon Hooker right now is the consensus mock draft for the Vikings, but only a 9% popularity. That tells you that among all the teams in the draft, that is one of the lowest probabilities of one player being taken, even though Hendon Hooker shows up in the most mocks for the Vikings. There's a lot of other possibilities for them, where they pick, how much need they have. Hendon Hooker maybe being a reach at 23 tells you a little bit about where they're at right now. They could pick a wide receiver. They could take a corner. They could take a quarterback. They could go a different direction. They could take a pass rusher. There's a lot of different directions they could go because even for a 13-win team, this is a team with a lot of needs. They could also trade down. They could also trade up. There's so many possibilities for this team, and even if they stay at number 23, I feel like it's hard to get a handle on what they're going to do, and it's complicated, of course, by the fact that 23, you are at the mercy of the first 22 teams in front of you. You don't know exactly how the board is going to unfold, and a lot of how the board unfolds at 23 depends, will be a predictor of what you are able to do, who you are able to take, what direction you're going to go, because positional values will change based on what other people are taking. So I feel like this is a very hard Vikings draft to get a handle on, especially with that number 23 pick, especially with all those needs. So I think we're just going to have to wait and see what's going to happen next week. There's not a whole lot of predicting that can go on, but the unpredictability and the volatility are also kind of fun. Let's finish with the cooler. Twins smoked by the Red Sox. Double digits for the Red Sox in runs. Kenta Maeda hit on the leg by a line drive early in that game, had to leave. We will see what kind of pitching depth they have now. Probably have to be some call-ups because they used a lot of guys in that game. Might have to miss 1, 2. I don't know how many starts he's going to miss at this point, but Maeda hit pretty hard by that. They've got some options down in the minors. Louis Varland pitched well in Maeda's place when Maeda had rested last time. Bailey Ober certainly an option at some point. So I'll be curious to see how they come through this pitching wise, both in the rotation and when it comes to the bullpen and how often those guys got worked, especially in this Red Sox series. Twins come home, part of a crazy weekend. We'll leave you with that thought. Wild, Wolves, and Twins all playing Friday night home games. Sunday, they are also all playing home games, but they are staggered. It goes Twins, Wild, and Wolves. I think it's 1 o'clock, 5:30, 8:30. You could go to all three. Unload the savings account. It's not my money. Go ahead and do it. Who knows? Go to all three games. Have a wonderful time. Or pick a couple. Pick one. You have no shortage of things to do this weekend if you are a Twin Cities sports fan. Like I said, I'll probably do a bonus podcast sometime Saturday or even late Friday, depending on how things are going, off of those game threes. And then Royce and I will have you covered on Monday, coming off of that huge Sunday of action. For now, that's all I got. Thanks for listening. I'm Michael Rand. Back at it again. Later.